Chadan soge chanamla chanchu batu tani kyapsuchi nagi chinsen tibet samangi androla penchi sange tu parashu Chadan soge chanamla chanchu batu tani kyapsuchi Andagi chinsuge samangi androla pinchi sangi ruparashu sangi achudan sugi chanamla chanchu batu tani kyapsuchi Andagi chinsuge samangi androla pinchi sangi ruparashu. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. Today, before beginning with, let's say, the subject of today, the topic of today, I wanted to explain briefly what we have just done. Because at the beginning of every meeting or teaching, etc., we always do these so-called preliminary prayers. And maybe some understand a little bit what they're doing. Some think that they understand but don't, and others don't understand at all. So just to understand a little bit, I'd like to explain. We're always reminded that before beginning anything, we should prepare ourselves. The preparation, there's a reason for preparation. A little bit like cooking, for example. Before cooking, before putting all the ingredients to make the dish, it's important to know what you're buying and how you're going to buying it. So let's say a good dish starts with a good market, choosing the right ingredients, preparing them, and then there's the moment where you actually cook all the ingredients together. If the preparation is done well, then let's say that a good part of the meal is already made, and you know if the preparation is done badly, then it's difficult to have a good outcome. Similarly, when we want to study or meditate anything, there are preparatory phases that are necessary. They help us begin what we are going to start, but correctly. When we share Buddhist teachings, what we call it, give teachings, there are some preparations that should be done. We begin with the verse, which is Tibetan, Locho Sampo Pakyuta Shipa, and then we have the mantra of our Guru, Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasanakama. This is where we are beginning. We start by remembering our own masters. One reason, also for me, is to remember myself, even though I don't think I ever forget. But in this specific moment, I'm generating this thought that if there's anything that I can share with you, it's because it was transmitted to me. So it's very important to start with an attitude of humility and gratitude, and remember that I am here to represent a lineage, something that was not created or invented by me. At the same time, we ask for blessings that go from our own Guru, Locho Sampo, which is the request of blessings to Lama Michel Rinpoche with his mantra. And then we do the mantra Om Muni Muni, which is the request of blessings, and also paying homage to Buddha Shakyamuni. It's a way to connect with our own Guru and the entire lineage all the way up to Buddha Shakyamuni. So we remember the root, the source, and also where I received all the teachings, etc. So it's for the one who teaches. It's a moment to remember and to recall a mind of humility, remembering that I'm here at the service of beings because I can only share what I have received. And we always begin with the prayer request and blessings of the Guru, also to remember that at the basis of the path, we need to rely correctly on our Guru. This is the first step. Those who've already studied this a little bit, this would be a moment to remember this. It's said that at the basis of a spiritual path, we need to create a relationship of love and trust with the one who leads us. So this prayer does that for us. The word prayer, in my opinion, is not the best translation. This concept of prayer, in reality, the word, there's this, I pray. I pray is like requesting something. Well, instead, often the prayers within the Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhist traditions, these are not requests. These are words and verses of aspirational words, and they're words that help us generate a certain inner state. So we start by connecting with the lineage, our own Guru, all the way to Buddha Shakyamuni, and then we recited also this verse, Sashipuki, and then we do this mudra like this. Maybe you've seen somebody do it. And this, from the time of Buddha, Buddha never taught anything without having first been requested. So there's a commitment that is transmitted from generation to generation, where here I am, here I have this responsibility of teaching, but I should never teach without being requested. So the commitment is never transmit, never teach if not requested. If one is requested, the first time there's no obligation, and not even the second, but upon the third request, there's the obligation to teach. But if one asks and the conditions are there, the person who has been asked and has all of the knowledge to transmit, and the person who has asked has the right conditions to receive, then one should teach. So when we recite Sashipuki, this is the offer, the mandala offering. It represents the request for teachings, because theoretically, actually also practically, I shouldn't share if I'm not requested. Clearly, we're here, we're all together. No one was forced to be here today, I think. So once you are here spontaneously, from your own will, already that is a form of request. It would be different if I went to your house and I wanted to convince you of something. This, from the time of Buddha, would never happen. One should not teach to those who are not open to learning. So from the beginning, we should have this request. It's so here we're remembering that we are transmitting based on this desire to learn. Then the verse, the refuge verse, Sangye Chudan Soge Chanamla. So in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge into enlightenment with the practice of generosity and the other perfections. May I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So generosity, the other perfections of patience, etc. Enthusiastic effort, etc. This is called generating motivation. I mean, why do I want to teach? Why do we want to receive? We need to reconnect to a deeper motivation. It's a motivation of love towards ourselves, love towards others. I'm not going to comment the verse, otherwise we would spend all day talking about this. But this verse reconnects us to why we're here. After that, or with this gesture, this gesture, this mudra, is like is done by who's transmitting the Dharma, where I reside. Which is in a few words means I'm sharing the Dharma in the language of each one, and there are different meanings to this. At the time of Buddha, for example, it's said that when Buddha taught, he had this ability that everyone understood in his own language. We have to remember that in India today there are 18 languages that are formally recognized. There's not one language of India. There are 18. Each one with his own grammatical structure. I mean, they're not dialects. I mean, they're 18 recognized languages. And at the time of Buddha, there were many as well. And it's said that when Buddha would teach, when Buddha would teach, people would understand in their own language. Today we have a simultaneous translation, but here Buddha is able to adapt himself to the needs of each person, including the language. And so from generation to generation, all the way from Buddha Shakyamuni, we make the request, we generate the motivation, and we generate the commitment. And the commitment is generated by the one who is teaching to adapt himself to the needs of those who are listening. This just to understand a little bit. And then there was, nothing is an obligation, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be seen as any kind of obligation. When I arrived, I did prostrations, and when I sat down, many of you did. What is this? This is an act of respect, and also a way to generate humility. It's said that, for me, for example, before I sit down here, which is really one of the most uncomfortable places I've ever been, and not physically, but it's said that turning your back to the altar, one assumes a tremendous amount of responsibility. So I do it with all the joy in the world, but it's not easy for me to be seated here. So I do prostrations when I arrive to remember that I'm here to share, and when I sit on this so-called throne, it's not to give value to me as a person, but to give value to the teachings of Buddha, to the Dharma. That's why before I sit down, I snap my fingers. Maybe you noticed. This represents impermanence. This continuous passing of time, and who teaches before he puts himself into a position of so-called respect. It's to remember the impermanence, to remember that sooner or later, more sooner than later, I'm going to die and to not be taken by the attachment to image or power. So here, with my back to the altar, and one could, run the risk of being taken by this attachment to image or power. So we remember impermanence as an antidote to this as well. And then we do also prostration. So we remember that we're here with our open heart and open mind and with humility. I also want to remind you that it's not because you come into a Buddhist temple that you have to do prostrations. You're all free to do what you feel, and you don't have to do any formality, let's say. Before talking about Buddhism, before getting into this introduction to Buddhism, I wanted to start with something else. It's in Tibetan it's called drupta or siddhanta in Sanskrit. Before translating the term, let's look for the definition. The definition in Tibetan is Rangi Lorma Tobar. Siddhanta or drupta is when one has the total certainty of something. In other words, it's a kind of paradigm, it's a worldview. It's when we are totally convinced about how something is, how reality is. And it's not something just conceptual, it's something deeper. It's our own worldview, which is the result of the education that we've received, the experiences that we've lived, the information that we've received. It's the result of our social cultural context in which we live and we were raised. It's the result of many things that we've received in our lifetime. This is clear, isn't it? But there's another assumption that's very important. All of us, inevitably, we live within a paradigm. In other words, all of us, inevitably, we see and we perceive everything through this filter of ourselves. If we take a situation, an object, a place, a person, a concept, and we put it in the middle, and we asked everyone to interpret it, or give it a name, give it a concept, how do we see this thing? How do we live this thing? It would be very hard to find two people who give the same answer, because we can be very similar as human beings, maybe having grown up in similar social cultural contexts, but we have different experiences. We've had educations, not just at school. I'm talking about all the information that we have acquired in our lifetime. These are different levels of filters through which we perceive reality. I don't know if this is clear. So each one of us, we live within our own paradigm. And we don't have a choice to not live within a paradigm. We don't have a choice to not have a worldview. The paradigm in which we live, this vision, this worldview that we have, determines our life experiences and consequently our own choices, our actions. So our paradigm, it's not important, it's fundamental. Because according to our paradigm, according to our worldview, we're going to experience things in one way or another. We're going to react in one way or another, etc. One of the first steps before getting into deepening Buddhist thought, we need to be aware that we are living within our own paradigm. We have our own worldview. It's an exercise that I've repeated several times, but I don't think it's very easy, and I've talked about this a lot, but I haven't deepened this much. It's quite sincerely. Understanding our personal view and the common view. What are the philosophical basis, the foundations of these views? For example, in our own worldview, we have a strong influence that comes from monotheistic religions. We have a strong influence. It's based on science and the Newtonian science, and we have a strong influence that comes from Descartes, and they're so strong we don't even imagine how much influence they have on us. There's things that we just take for granted, but how we were raised, and in this context, we really just take it for granted. Some time ago, I was reading a book that talked about time, and I can't find the book, and I can't remember the title, unfortunately. But in this book, anyway, they explained something that really touched me. That when we take a watch, for example, and we look at the time, we try to relate to an absolute time. We live, we're slaves of the hour, but at a time that we think that exists objectively. What time is it? How much time has gone by? We see time as something absolute and objective. This seems obvious. But in our worldview, this began from Newton on. Before Newton, even within physics and science, time was relative. There wasn't this idea of an objective, absolute time, because time, when you analyze it, even on a level of physics, time is specific, it's relative. There's my time, there's your time. It's, where you are, depending on where you are, that time actually changes. We're not going to get into this, it's not the topic of today, but the point is that we take for granted that time is absolute and objective without even thinking about it. It's just how we relate to it. But this is something that was taught to us. This is a concept that, that we grew up with. If we take someone who grew up a few centuries ago, they would have a concept of time that would be totally different. This is part of our worldview. And this changes our way of interacting and living. So, when we get deeper into Buddhism, we start, first of all, trying to understand what our starting point is, what our starting worldview is. And in the worldviews, they can be divided into two categories mostly. There are worldviews that are called spiritual and worldviews that are non-spiritual. And this is a very important division. There's Chidam and Chidami in Tibetan. The views that are non-spiritual, and I'm not talking, this is not something modern, this is what I studied in India in the most antique texts. You know, so the non-spiritual views are materialistic views where one's own suffering, one's own happiness depends on external conditions. And it's a worldview where our life is what we see and what we can experience today, and death is the end of our existence. So when one dies, it's over. And so life and mind, the mind is nothing other than electric impulses from the brain, and when that ends, then life finishes as well. It's 2,500 years ago in India, there was this worldview, and it's the materialistic worldview that we have today too. But even this so-called scientific view, I say so-called because there are many different views within the scientific one. But this is a worldview. So on one side, we have these materialistic views. I repeat, at the basis of a materialistic view is that reality is objective. You can interpret it in one way or another, but it's objective, and beyond death there's nothing. There is not anything to define cause and effect, the so-called karma, but what I do has an immediate effect, but then it's over. And the cause of suffering and happiness are mostly they mostly come from external factors. This is the first aspect that defines a materialistic view. And I ask myself, our own worldviews, is there a materialistic component or not? For us, let's remember that for worldviews, we're not talking on a conceptual level. We're talking about how we live daily. Where do I project my happiness when I suffer? Where do I look for the cause? Do I say, what are my, do I say, what is the mental defilement that has become the filter that has taken me to suffer, or are we just pointing the finger at something, someone? Our tendency is just to point our finger. So our worldview is very materialistic, has a very materialistic view. We start here. Even if conceptually we can say, no, I'm Buddhist, I believe differently. The classic, coming from a Buddhist is say, you ask what the causes of suffering are, and the one who has studied would say, the causes of suffering are mental defilements, like jealousy and anger and jealousy and attachment, and based on ignorance, and these generate a negative interdependence of body, speech, and mind that bring results that manifest as suffering, and the world that we perceive is relative as a filter a filter of ourselves. And then after 3 minutes, something happens. one gets upset, and then they just point the finger somewhere else. This doesn't mean that what one understood is not, that what one understood is wrong, but it just means that what understanding is not enough. And when we talk about a paradigm, it's something deeper. It's deeper than an intellectual understanding. So what we're talking about is our own paradigm that goes beyond our intellectual, conceptual paradigm. It's our world view. I mean, where do I project my happiness and my suffering in my daily life, in my spontaneous way of being? Am I aware? Do I believe in a continuation after death, or is it just a hypothesis? Do I live with this awareness of a continuation after death, or is it just a question mark, a possibility? One thing is, one thing is having a strong conviction of this continuation, or maybe one thinks, all I know is here I am, and when I die, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I like Buddhism. I'm here, but it's just a question mark. We're also strongly influenced by monotheistic views. So the first thing we need to get beyond is our materialistic view. Sorry, we're strongly influenced by a materialistic view. So we should go beyond this, which doesn't mean that material things are bad. It means generating awareness that there is something that goes beyond this body. When it's explained, like what spirituality is, and this is within Tibetan Buddhism, as I have understood it. But generally, it says that what determines if an action, physical, mental, or verbal, if it's spiritual or not, is if that action is done with the awareness and intention to transform and interact with something that continues after death. So it's said it's what goes beyond this life is spiritual. In other words, what does this mean? What goes beyond death? Wealth. What about wealth? Our goods, They continue, but they don't come with me. The things that I've accumulated in this lifetime, they will be used or divided up. But I can't take them with me. So material things, we just can't take them with them. They don't transcend this life. What about this body? Much less. Intellectual knowledge. No. Just, even if we talked about, if we take for granted that there's reincarnation. Have you ever seen a newborn who is able to teach at university level? No. Of course, there are many, many young children who have amazing predispositions for music and art and science, because it's said that when we familiarize ourselves deeply with something, when one is reborn, they have a strong predisposition for that. I remember reading a book, a book on math, on prime numbers, and it talked about the the life story of mathematicians who tried to resolve the mysteries of prime numbers. And in this story, there was a mathematician, when he was about 3 years old, he would correct the accounting of his father's shop. This is a strong predisposition for mathematics, like their children who, from a very young age, they're able to write or play a musical instrument, etc. For example, their children, you know, our Buddhist tradition, there are children who have a very strong predisposition for meditation and for philosophy. I mean, many that I knew myself. One who was in my class, and he was able to memorize about 1,500 pages a day, and he had it. He was really quite humble as well, and I remember once we were talking about dreams, and he said, for me, for as long as I can remember, it's absolutely normal to fall asleep, then to fall asleep, dream, and be aware. Okay, now I'm dreaming. Now I'm waking up, etc. And I never lost contact with my mind through sleeping. And it's said that that's actually one of the signs of a certain type of realization. If one has this dream awareness and is aware of this process of falling asleep and dreaming, this shows a strong, strong predisposition for that specific practice. There are people who have these strong predispositions, but even a person who has a strong predisposition on a conceptual level doesn't bring that information with him. One is reborn with a great facility to relearn, but doesn't know it already. So we can't bring our body or our wealth and the conceptual parts of our mind. We cannot bring them either. And what about our name? Nothing. So everything that is done that has as an objective to take care of material things, not as a means but as an end, where the final objective is the body in and of itself and sensations and physical pleasures, where the final objective is knowledge, where the final objective is a social position, our image, our name, etc. These are the actions and aspects that we can consider mundane, worldly. They're not bad and they need to be abandoned, but they're just worldly actions. They begin and they end in this lifetime. Is this distinction clear? So something spiritual instead is something that transcends this. For this, something becomes spiritual when it interacts in a way so that it cultivates aspects that we take from one life to another, positive ones, because reinforcing negative aspects, from life to life, we do that often too. I mean, the more you get angry, the more you are reinforcing that characteristic that you are going to bring to your next, you're going to bring to with you life to life, but it's not spiritual. It's taking care of characteristics, positive characteristics that go beyond this life, like the development of awareness, of love, of gratitude, of stability, concentration, of generosity, satisfaction, wisdom. These are all aspects that go beyond this life. The deeper aspects of our being on an emotional level, they go beyond this life. To understand this better, let's just imagine a person who at a certain point in his life has total amnesia. One wakes up in the morning and doesn't remember his name, doesn't remember people, doesn't remember the day before, has total amnesia. A person who has total amnesia, is it still the same person, or have the deeper parts of his being changed? I imagine that the same person continues. I say imagine because I've never had the opportunity to be in contact with someone who has had total amnesia. But what I imagine is that one forgets many aspects of himself, of life, etc., but the deeper habits stay. And it would be wonderful to have an amnesia of these deep negative aspects, but I've never seen that. I don't think that happens. Just see someone, for example, who has who suffers from senility, who doesn't have this ability to discern certain things, but the deeper aspects of that person continue. I remember of the mother of a friend of our friend who lives here in Albagnano, Margherita. Her mother died not too long ago. She had 100 years old. I remember her one day in Albagnano. She was in her 90s, and she was a level of senility. Senility where she had a short-term memory that lasted about 15 minutes, and she was joyous and sweet, but then after 15 minutes exactly, then she'd say, "Hi, who are you? How are you? Welcome." And she'd just start again, it was like an infinite game of cards. She'd say, "Oh, you want to play a game of cards?" And then you start again after. But what I saw is that she's someone who had lived in a certain way and had a basis of joy, of gratitude, of love. She was really a beautiful person. And even if she had this cognitive degeneration, this lack of a memory, she was trapped in a joyous state. The first thing, I thought to myself, imagine someone who was trapped in a state of dissatisfaction. What does that mean? It means that the predispositions, these deeper habits that we have, they continue. I see this with my grandmother, for example. She's really quite old, and she has some senility, but the deeper parts of her being continue. Maybe she doesn't recognize someone, but the deeper aspects of her character, they're all there. She knows. If we see this, that if we have a moment of amnesia or some kind of senility, the deeper aspects of our character, our mental habits, our emotional habits, the deeper ones, they continue. We're able to imagine this, right? This is more or less what happens from one life to the next. I always thought that reincarnation, we can understand it as waking up without remembering anything from the day before. What would happen if when we went to sleep and like every day was a new life without remembering anything from the previous day? What would be the difference between going to sleep and dying? What makes us afraid about death is not existing anymore. We're not afraid of sleeping because from one day to the next we have this certainty of continuity. They also explain that becoming a Buddha is said is there's a term with it, a Buddha is he who has transcended death. There's even a verse that says there's a verse that talks about the transcend. If signs of a premature death appear, may I with the clear vision of Mikyo Dorje, may I reach a state of immortality, a state where from one life to another we don't lose this connection, this awareness from one life to the next, where one keeps this awareness from the time through death and the rebirth. But the point, just going back to the point, is what transcends this life are deep mental conditionings that we have, the deep habits that we have, and the strength, the inertia of the actions that we do, the so-called karma. Karma literally means action. In reality, what goes beyond this life is not karma, but this so-called karmic force. To understand the difference is, if I take this object, if I throw it, once I've thrown it, I've completed the action, but once I've thrown it, depending on the direction and the strength, the object's going to continue to fly in the air. What would happen if it went? What would happen if it went beyond the atmosphere? It would just go on until it met another object. So this inertia of the action is called the karmic force. So action is literally karma. Karma is literally force. So this inertia is this karmic force. So what happens is everything we do physically, verbally, mentally, these generate this kind of inertia. They generate this karmic force, which at a certain moment in our lives, that karmic force is going to come into contact with another action that we do, and at that point we have a result, which is an experience. So it's said that what we bring from life to life are deep conditionings, are deep habits, and this inertia of the actions that we have done in this life and in past lives. This is what we bring from life to life. The spiritual worldview is the worldview that takes in consideration the continuation of life after death. It's a spiritual worldview. It's not a worldview where, how do you say? It doesn't turn its back on this life. No, it takes into consideration this life in this context of continuation. I don't know if that's clear. I can spend my entire life reciting mantras and emptying my mind of thoughts and of spirituality. I've done nothing, because what determines the spirituality, what determines if my actions are worldly or spiritual, is if there's the intention of cultivating that which goes from life to life, or maybe I want to want to eliminate my anxiety and become a great meditator. If maybe it's not necessarily negative, but it's worldly. I don't know if this difference is clear. Many masters over centuries in Tibet would reprimand disciples, saying, "What are you doing? You think you're here becoming spiritual, and yet you're being so worldly." I think even Lama Ganchen in the 1990s, he was going to the disco. In like 1993, 1995, Lama Ganchen, there was a period where he was bringing self-healing to the discos. This comes from a whole different concept of imprints. That everything we see, everything we perceive, see and hear, that leaves an imprint. And so, if you go somewhere like a disco, where you would never imagine that kind of encounter, and you meet self-healing, that leaves a deep imprint on people. Once he went to a kind of heavy metal concert. But what was he doing? He was planting seeds. He was creating imprints, creating connections, interactions with people who probably would have never come to him, met him. So what determines if an action is spiritual or worldly is not the action itself, but is most of all the motivation that's behind it. Clearly, there are certain actions that, if they're done with a similar motivation, that's better. But what determines if something is worldly or spiritual is whether one has that awareness of taking care of what continues, taking care also of this life, but what continues. In other words, it's an action that is done with the awareness of developing our own inner qualities, of trying to diminish those that create suffering and cultivate, positive karmic force. Is that clear up to this point? So now, after this, there's another division. Within a spiritual worldview, there's a division between, there's a Buddhist view and a non-Buddhist view. Once I was reading a book on Tibetan medicine. I read the introduction. I can't say I read the whole book. And in this introduction, there was a part that I liked a lot. It said that Buddhism is not a monotheistic religion. It's not a polytheistic religion. In other words, it's not a theistic religion, but he said that it's a psychological religion, because the basis is not about the relationship between the person and one god or many gods, but it's about the development of one's person, one's inner states of being. So one of the first differences that we have is, okay, so I'm aware of, and I want to take care of what happens after the death. If we look at other religions, I'd say that I think that most of you have grown up in a Christian context. Maybe someone is Jewish, but mostly you're Christian. So, I mean, you talk about what happens after death. No, there's a great importance given to what happens after your death. You do this, to go to heaven, and be careful. Be careful. Otherwise, you could go to hell. I mean, there is a final judgment day. I've, I'm not. I'm the last person who can talk about Christianity, but from what I've been able to see, I think that there's a strong there's a strong importance given to what happens after death. Lama Ganchen would say, Lama Ganchen would say, Christianity believes in reincarnation, in the sense that you can be reincarnated in heaven or in hell, but it's still a reincarnation. So all these spiritual traditions have this idea of continuity. But one of the main differences that we have, between monotheistic or polytheistic traditions, that an important part of that spiritual tradition has to do with the relationship between the individual and the God or the gods. And the Buddhist vision, the Buddhist view, the spiritual path is not based on the person and God and or more gods, but is based on a path of transformation of one's own habits and thinking. When they asked Buddha what he thought of the existence of gods, remember that 2,500 years ago, about in India, there's a polytheistic view, Vishnu, Brahma, Indra, etc. And Buddha's answer was, at least this is what they tell us, because even if I was there, I don't remember what it said, that he answered, I'm not here to tell you if gods or if a god exists or not. What I'm here to tell you that your happiness, your suffering depends on you and no one else. I'm here to help you to try to be happy and to not suffer. This is the point. So it's not that Buddhism is against the existence of God or many gods. In a few words, it's as if it doesn't change much if there's God or there's not. What's important, or if it's not important if you believe or if you don't believe. What's important is how you behave, how you live your life. What inner conditionings are you reinforcing or weakening? This is what's important. And then every once in a while, someone asks me if I believe in God. In front of that question, I ask what the person means by God, and based on that, then I can give you an answer. In any case, this is a fundamental point. The main difference is that in Buddha's view, Dagni Dagi, I am my own protector, I am my own enemy. Our path of happiness or suffering, our condemnation or our salvation doesn't depend on anyone other than ourselves. This is a fundamental point of the Buddhist view. And from here, we can enter a little bit more deeply into Buddhist worldview. And look at 4 fundamental questions that are going to determine the rest, which are i- what what is this suffering? Why do I suffer? Um, what is happiness? And what can I do to be happy? I've explained this many times. It's always coming back to the root. These are 4 questions, to which we already have answers, even if we're not that aware of them. All worldviews, all paradigms that we live in already have answers to these 4 questions. Because when we ask, what is suffering? We, in other words, suffering is seen as what we want to avoid. We have things that we want to avoid in our life, don't we? That's suffering. When we suffer, when we experience what we want to avoid, we have a reason. We can point our finger. I mean, we know why we're experiencing that. We have a kind of hope for happiness, don't we? Lama Michel once told me, you see, one of the signs that the nature of our mind is pure, and here we could open up parentheses, to understand what do we mean by pure nature, etc. He would say it's the fact that, is it deep, deeply, one never loses hope. It doesn't matter how often one falls down. There's a voice deep inside that says, "Get up. We can try again." There is some hope inside that sees this happiness. So we have an idea of what happiness is, and with that we do certain actions and we avoid others, trying to not suffer. I could think that suffering, I couldn't think that suffering is suffering of body and mind, or that it's caused because I was bad and someone is punishing me for what I've done. I can think that happiness it can be found beyond this life in heaven, and based on that, I follow a certain lifestyle, and and have certain conduct. So there's one worldview, and I'm not saying this is the worldview of Christianity. Like I said before, I'm the last one to talk about Christianity. But once I went to a parish in Milan, and I asked, I said, I think there are many Christian dogmas that originally were not dogmas. But when you take a tradition, you take a worldview, a religion, and you make that a religion for the masses, not all people have the conditions to follow that path and understand. So then at that point one makes a dogma and says, this is like this, and we're not going to explain it because you're not going to get there. I think there are many aspects of Christianity that are transmitted as dogmas, but that in reality, originally, they weren't. And this priest said that's absolutely true. I sincerely think that any religion, when it becomes a religion for the masses, it somehow is diluted. Same thing with Buddhism. Also, the perception that one has of a religion, when one has a superficial view, like many of us. Many have been raised within Christianity, but haven't had the opportunity to study it deeply. And one judges from a superficial level. So sincerely, I have a very superficial understanding of Christianity, and I don't. But but my example from before could be an example from Christianity or from another religion. You know, I've met people, they say, who have said, yeah, I suffer because I was bad in the past and now I'm being punished. And what is happiness? You know, happiness will come in the future when I will be blessed and prized after my death. So the common most common worldview that we have is that our suffering is mental and physical. It's a materialistic view. I mean, I suffer because the world around me is the way it shouldn't be, and people act the way they shouldn't act, and my body my body is the way it shouldn't be. The reality around me doesn't correspond to how it should be. This is one of the main causes on which we project our own suffering. We think that we're suffering mostly for three different reasons. We think that we suffer because we can't have what we want, because we need to live situations that we don't like, and because we need to be separated from the things that we do like. Try in just a moment to remember the last moments of suffering, even superficial ones, you know, small, medium, large. Just do they fall in one of these three categories? Why did I suffer? Why am I suffering? Because I can't have what I want? Because the person isn't the way I want? Because the situation is not how I want it? Because the person is not how I expected it to be? Because this, that, and the other is not the way I want it to be. I suffer because I'm living a situation I don't like. I have to come into contact with an object for which I have aversion. Or do I suffer because maybe I have to be separated from something that I have attraction to? Try just to fantasize for a minute. Just imagine. Would I be happy if I could have everything I wanted, if I could avoid everything I don't want, and if I could never have to separate from that which I love? Just imagine that for 1 minute. I'd be happy. But this illusion would be wonderful, wouldn't it? And somehow there's a part of us that really believes in this illusion. We do so much to avoid the things we don't like, to maintain, to keep the things we have attachment to, and to gain the things that we want. So often we think the cause of our suffering is one of these three things. As a consequence, where do we project our happiness? Our tendency is that our happiness is projected in having everything that we want, avoiding everything we don't want, and trying to keep everything that we like. Something that makes me smile is that when we talk about happiness beyond this life, and imagine a kind of pure land or heaven, how are the heavens described? And exactly with these three characteristics. Heaven is a place where I can have everything that I want, where everything I don't like isn't there, and where I never need to be separated from the things I love and the people I love. I'm convinced that if we would have to write out a a heaven, in modern terms, there would be fast internet, or I don't know. And if the concept of paradise, of heaven, in every context, in every culture, it's nothing other than these three things. Is this clear? Even when one projects one's happiness beyond this life, very often one is projecting into these three aspects: having objects of desire, avoiding objects of aversion, and keeping objects of attachment. This is where we project our happiness. Is that clear? And in front of this last point, what to do to not suffer? What do we do continuously? We try to avoid what we don't like. We try to obtain what we do like. And we try to keep our objects of attachment. And life, it goes round and round on these 3 points. Sorry if I've given you a curt summary, but we recognize ourselves in this. So this is a paradigm. This is the paradigm that we live in. Now, the paradigm that Buddha transmitted is different. It goes beyond this. It's not easy to realize, and it's a bit like swimming against the current, against our own habits. But first recognize our own paradigm, and we can see the following. Is it possible to obtain all objects of desire? For example, take the example of a person who, economically speaking, doesn't need to even think about his expenses. If we had a couple billion euros, for example, could we just have everything that we want? There's a saying in Italian that says, the more I have, the more I want. The nature of desire is dissatisfaction. And our experience is the more I'm able to get, the more I want. Because deeply, what is it that we want? Do we want the object itself? Or do we want this inner sensation of satisfaction? And deeply, we want this inner sensation of satisfaction. We don't really care about these objects. Very often, we don't even care about people. What we want is this inner state of satisfaction. Silence. What I mean to say is that often, unfortunately, it happens that we are more interested in our own satisfaction and well-being, more interested in our own than the well-being and the happiness of others. And often we use them to satisfy our own needs and our own well-being, which is not necessarily something evil, bad, but this is desire, this is not love. It doesn't mean that there isn't love too. Love is when your well-being and happiness is important for me. So where your suffering, your happiness, your experiences are important for me, and it's a priority for me. I love you. When I'm attracted to you, I want to be with you. I don't want to be separated from you. I want your attention, your presence, because through all of that, I feel better. This is mostly desire and attachment. You can have both. They're not contradictory, but they're two different feelings. What happens is that love, the, the more the more love there is, the greater sense of the more love there is, the more love there will be. Instead, with desire, when we have a strong desire towards something or someone, after a while, getting that object of desire, at the beginning there's this sensation of this feeling of well-being, but as we maintain contact with this object of desire, what happens to that sensation of satisfaction? I mean, is it sustained? Does it grow or does it diminish? What's your own experience? Have you ever fallen in love? What happens when one is able to get close to someone that they've fallen in love with? Yes, one's happy, but being together with that person, that feeling, is it stagnant like that, or does it change? When we fall in love with a place, with an object, with a situation, and we have strong desire, and we like it so much, and we're able to get it, it's wonderful. But keeping contact with that object, with that situation, with that person, whatever it is, what we've been able to obtain, that inner sensation of well-being and satisfaction just doesn't stay stable. It actually diminishes. And what do? We need something else. We need more. The problem here is not the object, but it's attributing to the object something that the object itself cannot sustain. So desire in itself and projecting our happiness on material objects, sensory pleasures, external situations, and people, etc., regardless of how wonderful they are, they could never sustain a state of happiness because the world around us is a reflection of ourselves. Let's give it an example. Let's say, for example, that at some point I generated a strong feeling of abandonment, and I feel abandoned. So I have this imprint inside, and when I live situations, I live them through this filter. I could be with the most wonderful person ever. Let's say maybe someone is even able to marry a Buddha. But one would still be married to a Buddha through the filter of one's own filter of abandonment. And at a certain point, one will feel abandoned. Doesn't matter how much I can get, I will feel abandoned. There's a sadness, abandonment. There's certain conflicts that, we have conflicts inside, and as long as we're not able to be at peace with ourselves, we're not going to be well with the world around us, because we're not going to be able to experience and perceive anything independently of ourselves. Once an Indian master said, if you're alone and you're not well, it means that you're not in good company. There's something wrong. But this is company that we can never abandon. So being with someone else is wonderful, but first of all, we need to be well with ourselves to be well with others. So it doesn't matter our physical state, our sensory pleasures, our wealth that we're able to gain, the people that we share our lives with, the situations we live, experiences. It doesn't. As long as we have our own conflicts and inner conditionings, dissatisfaction, etc., we are going to live our world through that, through those. So it doesn't matter how much I can get, it's just never going to be enough. So this first aspect, I will be happy when I will be able to get everything I want, and I suffer because I suffer because I can't get what I want. This is an illusion. It's an illusion because, first of all, because it's not possible, and if we just, give it a little intellectual sincerity here, is it possible to get all objects of desire? Once I was at lunch with an economist friend, and he explained the definition of the classic definition of economy, which was economics. Economics is the science to satisfy the infinite desire of man with finite resources of the earth. This is the biggest craziness. When I heard that economics is the science that has the objective to satisfy the infinite desire of man using the finite resources of the planet. I mean, but just the definition just shows the level of craziness in which we live. I mean, how is it possible to satisfy something that is finite? In Brazilian, we would say it. We would call it a black hole. I mean, you can never. It's a hole without a bottom, a bottomless pit. In Tibetan, we say it doesn't say no matter how much you squeeze a sand, oil is never going to come out. And similarly, no matter how much one does to get all objects of desire, one won't reach a stable state of satisfaction, not because those objects are bad, but because it's not in their nature to be able to sustain us, because the problem is somewhere else, and something is very crazy, but true with this definition of economics. I mean, that we're trying to use finite resources that will finish to satisfy infinite desires. Folly. So getting back to us, this idea of being happy by obtaining all our objects of desire is total folly. It's craziness. It's like saying, I will be happy when we go live on Mars. We create a kind of illusion. But let's tell the truth. Just from the little that they've shown us from planet Mars, why would we ever leave Earth and go there? From what we've seen, up to now, what's on the moon, what's on Mars, so, what's beyond this galaxy. Why would we leave this planet that is so beautiful? Maybe, maybe there is some kind of being, because of their psychophysical constitution, is better off there in Mars, but that wouldn't be for us. We'll just open and close parentheses. It would be much wiser to take the resources. It'd be a lot more wiser to take the money that we're using, to study and go towards Mars, and use it to invest in education and in environment here on Earth. Anyway, so this illusion of trying to get all our objects of desire, that's just a total illusion. And avoiding all our objects of aversion, too. We do try to avoid our objects of aversion, avoid situations we don't like, the people we don't like. We try to avoid the food we don't like. We continuously try to avoid what we don't like. Are we able completely? No. Because the aversion is inside, and as long as I have aversion and dissatisfaction, what we'll do is that in reality, how can I explain it? Let me just take a step backwards here. It's not that there's a situation that I don't like. It's the opposite. We judge the world around us through these inner feelings, these inner sensations that we have. Let me give you an example that is a little bit superficial, but maybe it helps. Some time ago, maybe about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, I did a COVID test, and it came out positive. It was a rapid COVID test, and it came out positive. I said, oh, okay, what happened? I had 60 people tested. I called the head of the hospital, and I told him, and he said, come and come and do the molecular test. Come and do one, because sometimes with the rapid test there are false positives. So I went to him. I had to wait until the afternoon of the following day. It came out negative, but in the meantime, sincerely, I don't have a lot of, I'm not very paranoid. I don't have a lot of problems, but I had a wonderful experience of self-observation where I started feeling COVID symptoms everywhere. I took my temperature 3 times. I thought a little bit of a sore throat, which is totally normal for me. If I'm a little cold or if I'm very tired, I start feeling it immediately. A little bit of sore throat, but that time I was like, oh yeah, I've got it. But what happened is I had information, and I started to judge my sensations through that context. There are also some different scientific studies that say that we judge our feelings through the context in which we find ourselves. There's something else that we do. It's similar, but somehow it's the opposite side. We judge. More than judge, we create narratives, storylines. We perceive the world around us to justify our inner feelings. Take the example from before. I have a strong feeling of abandonment. What do? It's not me who feels abandoned, it's the world around me that abandons me. And what we continuously try to do is create an external reality, a storyline that matches this inner feeling, this inner experience. I don't know if that's clear. Once I heard a contemporary philosopher who said, politicians don't tell the truth when they're running for office because people don't want to hear the truth. People they want to hear a coherent version of things that lines up with their feelings and thoughts. So we're constantly judging the world and perceiving world, trying to find some coherence with my feelings. So I'm feeling aversion. Why am I feeling this aversion? I need to find a reason. And every time we have a feeling of pleasure or of suffering, do we try to follow this inner process? Or do we just enjoy it or wait for it to pass, or do we try to look for a reason? Normally, we look for a reason, and most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, it's not that, because usually it's not just one cause. It can be caused by many things. The interactions with other people, our hormones, cycles of nature. There's just an infinite number of reasons that lead to this feeling. And when we do find a reason that seems to be coherent, it's almost as if we can relax. Some time ago, someone asked me, why does one find a kind of satisfaction in criticizing others? And I had never thought about it, but one reason that I found could be that if I'm in front of you and I'm not feeling well, I have a kind of aversion towards you in that moment. I need to find some kind of reason for it, and it can't, of course, be my fault. You see, because you act like this, because you do this, and you say like this, I found a kind of storyline that is coherent with my feeling, and if a third person agrees, then I'm at peace with myself. I'm with you, I don't feel well, I go to another and said, oh, did you see that person who did this, who did that, how does he dare, etc., and somehow that person agrees, then I have found some kind of justification on the outside world for my inner sensations. In psychology, the term is, I understood. I was calling it selective cognition, but it's not that. I can't remember. But this selective cognition is that when we start seeing something outside, we start seeing it everywhere. For example, a few weeks ago, I started to have a certain interest for mushrooms. Every day, I take like a half an hour walk in the woods. At a certain point, I started seeing mushrooms. And then I found an app that takes a picture of the mushroom that shows me what kind of mushroom it is. And I started to give a little bit of attention to mushrooms. And now they are everywhere. And they weren't there before, I'm telling you. I don't know why, but it's just a few weeks ago, starting a few weeks ago, then the mushrooms started growing everywhere. Before they weren't there. Maybe a year and a half ago, for example, when we were doing the work on the temple, the architect told me that I needed to do this electric transformation cabin, and I said, okay. I said, okay, do it. How is it? What is it? I said, it needs to be 13 meters long. And I was thinking, what is an electric transformation in cabin? I've never seen one. No, why do we need to do it? And the architect was saying, no, they're everywhere, And I was saying, I was arguing with him. I was arguing with him, saying, no, it's not true. I've never seen them. And then in that period, I drove from Albagnano to Malpensa, and I noticed that there is an electrical transformation cabin, like mushrooms, so like one after the other, and this is a trip that I've done so many times, and I swear to you that they were not there before, and then just at a certain point they just appeared. But I opened myself to their existence, and there they were. This is to say that what we see, I'm not talking about our judgment. I mean, what we physically see, what we perceive around us is a reflection of our inner state of being and of our awareness. I don't know if that's clear. And what we do is that we perceive our world in a selective way, looking for a kind of coherence with our feelings. So if I have an inner sense of dissatisfaction or conflict, I will continue to look for an outside storyline that is going to justify that inner feeling. In other words, it doesn't matter how much I try to avoid objects of aversion, I am going to recreate them everywhere because the aversion I feel is inside of me. I don't know if that's clear. So the idea of being able to avoid objects of aversion is a total illusion. Third point, keeping objects of attachment. No matter how much I like someone, a situation, or whatever it is, am I able to keep that experience, that reality, for forever? No. When we have something that we like a lot, for which we develop attachment for, this attachment is grasping at something and not letting go. So here, for example, my water, I am not going to give it up. I like it so much. I've worked so hard to get it. Is it possible to always keep it? Is there something that we can keep forever? Could never be separated from? And then the day we are separated from it, we're going to suffer. No matter how much I try to not separate from a place, a person, an object, an experience, sooner or later, we have to separate. Because we transform, the situations transform, it's in constant transformation. So it's not possible to hold on to it forever. So these 3 points on which we project our happiness are all illusions. So holding on, wanting wanting to get all our objects of desire, avoiding objects of aversion, and holding on to our objects of attachment. So our paradigm tells us that we suffer because we don't get what we want. We have to experience things that we don't want, and we need to be separated from things that we like. Is that clear? The paradigm that Buddha brought says it's not like this. It says reality is not that you suffer because you can't have what you want. Reality is that you suffer because you desire what you cannot have. I don't know if that difference is clear. Let me repeat again. It's not true that we suffer because we can't have what we want. In reality, we suffer because we want that which we cannot have. And it's not we can't have it because someone is keeping it from us. No, we can't have it because in this present moment the causes and conditions are not there for that to happen. It's as if I desired the sun to rise in the west. What would you say to me if I suffered because the sun, if I suffered because I want the sun to rise in the west? Somebody would tell me that I'm suffering for nothing. When we say, oh, this shouldn't be like this, it's the same thing. Because if something is, it's because the causes and conditions have created it, so that it can be like that. I mean, I've used this metaphor of the falling leaf, or of the wave of the ocean. When a leaf falls from a tree and it falls in one position, if we asked ourselves, why did that leaf fall here? Not a millimeter in this direction or that direction. Why did the leaf fall just here? Is it just is it a random, or is it the result of an enormous interdependence of causes and conditions? You know, the atmospheric pressure, the wind, the child that was playing underneath, the car that drove by, the insect that walked across it. I mean, all of these conditions, you know, brought it so that that leaf fell in that perfect position. If instead the insect, you know, if the insect, if the insect had taken a different path, or a car had gone by with different speed, or the wind had been different, you know, then the causes and conditions would have been different, and then the leaf would have fallen in a different place. So the position in which the leaf fell, given the causes and conditions that were there, made that position perfect. So could that leaf had fallen in a different place given those causes and conditions? Some would said, well, if something had been different, well, at that point the causes and conditions would have been different, the result would have been different, but with those causes and conditions, the leaf couldn't have fallen anywhere else, which means that the position, the place where the leaf fell, was not random. It was absolutely perfect. So in this present moment, in this moment of our lives is like the position of the leaf. Your life is your life perfect? the question is not, do you have problems in your life? Do you have suffering in your life? No, the question is this present moment in everyone's life, it is perfect in the sense that it couldn't be different given the causes and conditions. And and of course, if anyone said, if I had, well, of course, when you have if, then anything can come after that. So what I learned in my life is very useful to take away the use of the word if. If I had done, if he had said, then you have an infinite number of probabilities. That, but what we have is what really happened. So the if should be applied to the present moment, not to the past. Today, where I am, if I act in one way or another, the future result will be different, won't it? Yes. So it's not that we don't have free will, we have free choice, but in this present moment, not in the past. What happened has happened. It's there. And when we're able to see the perfection of our life, that the society in which we live is perfect. Someone asked me if I agree with everything that's happening. Absolutely not. If I were to project my own idealized image of how I think society should be, it would be very different in many aspects. But the point is, what we are living today is the fruit of the result of the choices and the interactions of everyone who is part of this society up until today. Since a very, very long time. The question, if I do this today, how is that going to interact? So, it was enough for the insect to move in a different way, to make the leaf fall in a different position. There was a metaphor represented for this. It was a movie. The life of Benjamin Button, and there is a scene in that movie where a girl gets hit by a car, and before she gets hit by a car, they go back in time, and they show that the taxi driver was late. Very small things that happened one after the other that brought to that moment. And it would have been enough for someone to have gotten up a little earlier, a little bit later, for that event not to have happened. So we shouldn't go against our present moment, but we should, with awareness, help develop our future, and we shouldn't fight with our past either. So remember that we don't suffer because we don't get what we want. No, we suffer because we. I don't suffer because I can't get. I suffer because I desire what is not possible to have. I suffer because I project into this present moment an idealized image that doesn't correspond to the causes and conditions at hand. It's like going to someone and saying, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be like this." Oh, thank you. If someone said this to us, maybe someone already has, what would we answer? If I am like this, it's because I can be like this. Why am I like this? because of all my past experiences, everything I've lived has brought me to be like this. If you come to me and say, okay, let's try to change this habit, it would be better if you weren't like this anymore. Oh, okay, well, what can we do so that I gradually can change and not be like that anymore? And then we can try to work in that direction. But nobody can blame me for being how I am. I am the fruit of an incredibly complex network of causes and conditions. So we suffer because we desire what we cannot have. And the difference of thinking that we suffer because we cannot have what we want, in that case, I'm a victim. In the second case, I'm the creator of my own happiness or suffering. I'm responsible. I suffer because I desire what I can't have. It's not the fault of the world, but because I'm not able to relate in a healthy way with the world around me. Is that difference clear? The main point is that if the cause of my suffering is caused by others, then my happiness also needs to depend on others, and then I'm trapped. If the cause of my suffering and it depends on my own attitude, then the cause of my happiness also depends on my attitude, and I'm full of hope. So Buddha said it's not true that we suffer because we need to come into contact with objects of aversion. It's not true because we need to live experiences that we don't like. In reality, we suffer because we have aversion to situations that we inevitably have to live. I don't know if this difference is clear. I'm not suffering because you are talking to me in that way. I suffer because I'm not able to face that situation peacefully. I'm not suffering because that thing is like that. I'm suffering because I don't know how to face that situation in a way that in a peaceful way. And in this third point, it's not true that we suffer because we need to be separated from that which we like. We suffer because we are not aware of the natural impermanence of things, and we don't accept deeply this constant transformation. Because if I like water a lot, and I'm aware of its impermanence, the day that it ends, I'm happy. Not because it ended, but because I enjoyed it, and I'm not going to feel it like a defeat because I don't have water anymore. And it's not an act of violence. The fact that it has run out, it's part of its nature. If there's someone that we love a lot, for whom we have a strong attachment, and that one day that person leaves his body, it's not a defeat. It's, death is absolutely natural. Once there's birth, then eventually there's going to be death. People are trying for another an alternative. I mean, there's a company in the United States where, like, among the richest of the world, they invest a couple millions a year to do research on immortality, and they're doing research on cellular regeneration, and they forecast that in 2030, if you have if your body is healthy enough and you have enough money, you can, with their research, you can live 500 years. But imagine just going to a psychologist if you're 500 years old. I mean, how much have you accumulated in your mind, Because if we want it or not, being born and dying is like resetting, kind of like going to sleep and waking up, So, it's like starting a little bit anew, and so the rebirth is a little bit of a reset, which can be very helpful. Life is precious and should be taken care of in the best way we can, but death is part of life, and there's nothing wrong with it. What's tragic is living badly. So if we need to separate from someone because they've died, there's no defeat. The problem is living that relationship, living moments together as if they were forever, and not knowing how to enjoy the present moment. But with the awareness of impermanence, I enjoy those moments, and when that person will no longer be there, I'm happy for the moments that we shared. It doesn't mean that I'm happy that the person is no longer there, but I'm happy for what was. Are we able to see this difference in paradigm? Now, just briefly, let's go back to the first one. That first question, what is suffering? What do I want to avoid? The common view is that suffering is a physical suffering, it's pain, it's thirst, hunger. It's the suffering of being hot or cold. It's a mental suffering of resentment, anxiety, fear, sadness. This is clear, isn't it? So there's a question we've asked ourselves 1,000 times, but it's good to ask again. Between the two sufferings, physical or mental, which one do we have more of? In your opinion, do we all agree that we mostly have mental suffering? One master of Lama Michel Rinpoche during teachings that I was able to hear, I heard a recording. He said that we have these two types of suffering, mental and physical. The poor people suffer mostly from physical suffering. Rich people suffer mostly from mental suffering, but at the end of the day, they suffer the same, And the fact that we have more mental suffering is a sign that we live in a materially rich reality. What happens is this, we try to avoid mental suffering, don't we? We're good here. It's, it's winter, and we have heavy coats, and we turn on the heat, and so we're trying to avoid physical suffering. And in the summertime, we have air conditioning. In the winter, we have heating. We try to dress comfortably. We make sure that our fridge is always filled so that we don't go hungry. We're good at avoiding this physical suffering. Mental suffering, we're not as good at that. We try to avoid it, don't we? But often, unfortunately, we try to avoid mental suffering with things that don't really help. What I see is that what people do to try to avoid mental suffering is like having having like a smelly object. Just imagine it for yourself, something that stinks, and you just spray perfume on top of it. So we spray perfume on it, and we don't smell the stink. But after a while, the perfume wears off, and the bad smell comes back. Or 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 maybe we just look the other way and we try to forget. But from physical suffering, what should we do if we have physical problems? Are we going to meditate, or should we go look for a good doctor? If I'm hungry, should I meditate? Maybe meditation helps, but it's not going to resolve the problem. We should eat. So body, we have a problem in our body. Our solution can be found in the body. I have mental suffering. I have anxiety, I have fear. I have mental suffering. Where can I find the solution? Is it at the shopping center? Is it on Amazon? Is it in sex, drugs, alcohol? So what's our tendency? Is to look for antidotes to these problems, or are we just going to spray perfume on the problem? And on this, Buddha explained a second type of suffering, which he calls the suffering of change. They're not good translations, but so using the same metaphor, the suffering of suffering is when that thing stinks. The suffering of change is when you put on perfume, or when you cover it up and you don't see it anymore. What happens? So we have sadness, we have resentment, we have fear, or a feeling of abandonment, our own conflicts and inner sufferings. At a certain point, we experience some kind of external pleasure, and in that moment, that inner suffering stops momentarily, and we have this feeling of well-being, of pleasure. But what happens? No matter how much I try to keep that sensation of pleasure, that bad smell that's underneath, sooner or later, is just going to come out. The effect of the perfume, sooner or later, just wears off. That's why these moments of pleasure, there's nothing wrong with them. They're called the suffering of change. It means that no matter how good they are, they're not able to maintain a level of well-being, because the putridness of what's underneath is going to come out sooner or later. So sensory pleasures, wealth and the recognition of our image, or getting your objects of desire, avoiding your objects of aversion, and keeping your objects of attachment. These are things that make us feel good at the moment. And there's nothing wrong with those, but they are illusions of happiness, because when you maintain your contact with them, sooner or later, the bad smell underneath is going to come out. So it's called the suffering of change, it's a suffering of change because of the nature of it, that sooner or later will bring change. When one has a lot of sadness, no matter how much I try to forget about that sadness with sex, drugs, alcohol, or chocolate, when the effect of that pleasure wears off, the underlying suffering comes out. That third type of suffering is called all-permeating suffering. The all-permeating suffering, in a few words, is that, says that that we can pour tons of perfume on we can pour tons of perfume on that thing or cover it up. It's not going to resolve the problem. The all-permeating suffering tells us that as long as my psychophysical reality of body and mind is polluted by dissatisfaction, anger, jealousy, envy, fear, arrogance, selfishness, ignorance, etc., together with this inertia of actions that have been generated and done with these feelings, there will be suffering. It doesn't matter where I am, with whom I am. I mean, I can have moments of joy, but sooner or later, that negative thing is going to show up. It's going to manifest. So here Buddha is saying there's nowhere to go. We can create a beautiful external reality, but it's not going to be able to sustain a real state of well-being, and it's not enough to avoid mental or physical suffering. Because after a while, it's just not going to hold up. Instead, Buddha talks about a state of happiness that is not precarious. It's not. He talks to us about a sustainable happiness, using a modern term. It's a state of happiness and well-being and balance and peace. And the state itself generates a state of peace. So the more it nourishes itself. And Buddha says that it's possible. And that's already the third question. So what is suffering? Why do I suffer? We looked at that already. And Buddha said the cause of suffering are the mental defilements, or rather is the inner conditionings and conduct. And when they are present, they take away that inner state of peace. It's not that there are certain things that are bad. It's not this fight between good and evil. No, there are certain ways of acting, interacting, certain inner conditionings, emotions that when they are present, they strongly take away this state of peace. In Tibetan, the definition is sem raptumachi. Nyomo is a mental defilement or destructive emotion. Nyomo. Usually we use the term mental defilement. The definition is the inner states that when they arise, they bring a strong state of non-peace. Jealousy, attachment. Just try to remember a moment where you were jealous. Did you feel peaceful? When you were feeling a strong attachment or dissatisfaction, fear or anger or envy, you're not able to stay balanced. And it's the same for selfishness and ignorance. So the causes of our suffering are our mental defilements, together with the actions that are guided by those mental defilements. Because when we do something, even if that feeling has already passed, we bring with us, we bring the consequences with us. I don't know if it's ever happened that you've gotten angry, and then at a certain point the anger has gone by, but then you still need to deal with the consequences of your actions, when you were taken by that anger. At the same time, we take this inertia with us. This so-called karmic force brings consequences. So suffering is caused by our destructive attitudes and our actions, and as a consequence, with this karmic force, this inertia of these actions. The third question: what is happiness, and is it happy? Is it possible to be happy? Try to imagine for just a moment. Imagine your own lives. Try for just a moment to observe the different characteristics of your life. Observe our physical situation. Observe our material situation, our economic situation. Without judging, just observe our work situation, our social situation, our familial situation, human relationships, our surroundings, and try to look at every corner of our lives, of our reality. Try to make a kind of photograph of our present moment, our life as it is. And for a moment, we allow ourselves to imagine. Imagine this life as it is, with the body as it is, with my family situation as it is, material situation as it is, with everything we had observed before. But it's the same, but with some big, small differences. Let's imagine our life without being attached to an idealized image of how things should be. A life where we are able to flow with impermanence without being attached to an image of how things should be. With these same conditions, we're no longer in conflict with others, and we understand that everything is perfect according to these causes and conditions, and we are here to interact virtuously. So there's no conflict with anything or anyone, and we're able to connect heart to heart, sincerely with everyone, where the happiness of others is as important to us as our own. So we have feelings of love that are very sincere towards every being that we see. There are no more enemies. Imagine our own life where we have this inner states of stability, where the external circumstances do not take away our peace or our inner stability. But we're able ourselves to travel stably, independently of the situations we meet. So imagine this state of satisfaction, of balance, of peace, of love, of joy. So the question is, do we want this? If we had this possibility, do we want the life that we have? Do we want a life the way I just described? Or do we want an inner reality that we already know with a different external reality? If you were able to change everything about your life externally, but inside you are the same, or would you choose keeping your external life as it is, but being able to change inside? Sometimes people say a little bit of both, but if we want a little bit of both, it means that we don't really have faith in inner change, And the question is, where are you projecting your happiness? In which one? I mean, Buddha talked about nirvana being a state that goes beyond suffering, that it's not conditioned by external conditions, but is based on an inner state of being where one stays in a state of satisfaction and peace and balance independently of where one is or with whom one is or with what conditions one meets. Maybe one says, Lama, it's wonderful, but it's not possible. But I say differently. Also, because I have known people who were and who still are examples of this. I mean, the first being Lama Michel Rinpoche. It's not that Lama Michel Rinpoche always had an easy life, but in all situations that I saw him, from the most beautiful to the most difficult experiences, I never saw him lose his balance or peace from the first to the last day. Never lose his smile. And this is an example that is possible. What I see with myself and what I see in the people that I interact with, I mean, the biggest difference comes not from what we do or where we are, but how we do things, how we interact. It's so clear that we live our reality through a filter of ourselves, and if we put more energy in cleaning that filter instead of changing external reality, we would have great results. So that third question, what is happiness? What do I want? Not just conceptually, but deeply, what do I want? What do I fall in love with it? What do I have passion for in this life? In the Buddha's view, passion comes in two levels. The first is the passion for a state of peace that is self-sustainable, that doesn't depend on external conditions. And the second level, which is a consequence of the first, is where this passion is for the sustainable peace of others, where your happiness is as important to me as my own, where your suffering is as important to me as my own, where my life objective is to develop my inner qualities so that I can help you do the same. This is the objective. And as a consequence, there's this fourth question: what do I do in my life to avoid this suffering and be happy? Obviously, we live in a reality where we have a body, where we have our conditionings, we have our weaknesses. We need to know also how to respect them, but not too much. The question is, do we project our happiness onto material things or not? Yes, we do. So we're not able to abandon that from one day to the next, but gradually we should give more importance to how we live internally the situations instead of changing them externally. One of the first steps along the path that was transmitted by Lord Buddha that I see, to enter the path sincerely and deeply, one needs to stop victimizing oneself. It's not easy. I mean, beyond it being the national and international sport. I mean, it is a deep feeling. But when we victimize ourselves, I suffer because of this, that, or the other. we're waiting for something else to resolve it, and life goes on. The problem is that life goes on by reinforcing more and more our negativities. And when one, as we said before, when one is reborn, one brings these deep habits that one has generated in one's lifetime. Who do I want to be when I'm reborn? For myself, I've always tried to work on one of my weaknesses, which is laziness. And I asked myself, do I want to be reborn lazy? I mean, the only choice I have is to make the changes now. Because when we look towards our future in this life and beyond this life, what we will be is the continuation, the continuity of what we already are. So if I don't want to live with certain feelings, I need to try to change those habits now, gradually, one day after the next. Remembering that this whole process, this path, is done with a deep and strong feeling of affection towards ourselves, of love, of welcoming ourselves, of acceptance. I mean, we never have feelings of feelings that we need to punish ourselves or we need to refuse ourselves. Because if I say, okay, I do something I shouldn't do, and I did something bad, and now I need to punish myself. But I can, but I can suffer a lot, but that's not going to change the habit so much. It's not because I suffered for that things and I was punished that's going to change that habit. That habit changes by not following that habit anymore and by generating an opposite habit. So one needs to be courageous and firm with a lot of love and affection towards ourselves, but sometimes we need to just look ourselves in the eye and say, stop it. Stop it. There's no but. Let's remember that sometimes we maintain certain habits not because we think that habit is good for us, not because we don't want it to be different, but for a strong attachment at being right. I don't know if that's clear. And that's horrible. We need humbleness. I'm wrong. There's nothing better than being aware of having made a mistake and accepting it and being open to change. But we have a strong attachment to our own image, and often, sometimes accepting with ourselves that certain things that we have done are not right means also letting go of that attachment to that idealized image of ourselves that we have. Along this path, we need humbleness towards ourselves and towards others. We need sincerity. Because we can trick others, but we can also try to trick ourselves. We need to have we need to be deeply sincere with ourselves. Courage. With courage and humbleness. So we should have strong desire towards this state of peace. A fundamental point is to ask ourselves, me, in this life, what do I want? I like family, I like friends and nature, I like all these things, but deeply, what do I want? And when we get to the conclusion that what I want is to be at peace with myself and others, what I want is to help others be well. At that point, what do I need to do? I need to avoid these conditionings that bring sufferings. I should try to cultivate a healthier lifestyle, physically, verbally, mentally, and let's remember that this is a gradual process, and the changes are done day after day, from one thought to another, gradually. And and if someone says, well, what if I'm not able to get out of this state of cycle of suffering before dying? Don't worry, there are other lives to come. But what's important is that the imprint that we make in this lifetime, we are going to bring to the next. And if someone says, I want to reach enlightenment sooner, I said, give it a try. Put effort there. Once I heard, a poet say, and the question was, what's the function of utopia? And he said the utopia is like the horizon, and because the more you walk towards the horizon, the farther the horizon looks. And so the function of a utopia is to get you walking, So here we are trying to really go beyond all of our mental defilements and mental our mental habits. So we want to get beyond all these conditionings and master all of our qualities. So we have this choice. What do I want to reinforce? What direction do I want to go? Do I want to reinforce my negative habits or cultivate my qualities? So just to conclude, we all live, whether we want to or not, within a paradigm. And what Buddha did, from my point of view, he shared his paradigm with us, among doing other things, of course. And he gave us also tools to change our own worldview. So one objective within Buddhism is to transform our own paradigm. The objective here is not to become Buddhist. I don't want anyone to become Buddhist. To be Buddhist means to follow the example that Buddha gave and try to reach the paradigm that Buddha transmitted. I desire that everyone has more satisfaction, love, respect, gratitude, concentration, wisdom, of course. But you call yourself what you want, dress the way you want. This is not important to me. We can make a new religion of Mickey and Minnie Mouse, or we all dress up with big, mouse ears, if we make new mantras, if that helps us have more stability and love, then let's do it. The point is not about becoming Buddhist. The point is to have more inner peace, have less suffering, for ourselves and for others. And here we have a choice that's fundamental, and it's not easy. If I want to live my life where I am the result of the world around me and of my past, and I let my past and the world around me to determine my inner state of being and my choices. And in other words, I do this because that happened. I do this because this other person does this. And the other possibility instead is to choose to act in the present, not conditioned by the past, but conditioned by the future that I want to reach. I act today in this present moment. Yes, this moment is also a result of the past, but it's a cause for the future. So I choose to act and interact with awareness, walking towards an objective to reach this state of peace, this so-called nirvana. It's not an easy choice in the sense it requires courage, sincerity, humbleness, effort, determination. It means going against our habits. It means swimming against the current. But I prefer to swim against the current than being taken by the current and being thrown from rock to rock. It means not being the victim of the world, but taking the reins of our life in our own hands. It means being our own protector and stopping to be our own enemy. And along this path, that fourth question, what should we do to not suffer and to be happy? There's a whole world, how to love ourselves and develop love for others and have the right the view of reality. I mean, there's meditations and mantras, etc. These are all tools that are going to help us mold, shape our minds to be more virtuous. There's instruments, they're tools, and one should follow the path that's most adapted, that is best adapted to your own needs. Often people often ask me, I really like Buddhism. How do I start? And Lama Genshin, he had an approach where it wasn't like step 1, step 2, step 3. That was the same for everyone. It was much more similar to a friendship when there's trust, when there's this friendship and affection, then one can do so much. One has a predisposition for philosophy. Maybe there's someone who doesn't really like philosophy. It's too conceptual and likes the silence of meditation. Or maybe someone likes the ceremonies and the mantras, and then someone likes everything. Take it all. But it's not that there's one way that everyone needs to do in the same way. If someone says, okay, maybe someone says, I like the philosophy, but I'm not so into reciting mantras, that's fine. Or sometimes people have said, sometimes Lama, when you give teachings, I don't understand anything and I just get nervous. I like to just recite mantras. That's fine. I mean, that's the beauty is also here. Here, when you look up and you see these 108 mandalas that are all different, but but the way to enlightenment, you just need one way actually. But so why are there 108 mandalas here? Because we're all different and we all need different approaches, and there's not one that is right for everyone. So one needs to also kind of try out the different roads. And there are things to learn, the 3 principal aspects of the path, and there's a silent meditation, there's self-healing, there's the 6 dharmas of preparations. I mean, there are many things that someone can learn if one wants to follow in a more, so-called formal way. But the most important thing is a connection heart to heart. and a strong desire that one gradually develops. This desire to transform one's own mind instead of trying to change the world around it. For this week, we're going to conclude. Thank you all for being here, whether it's your first time or you've come many times. Thank you all for those of you who are following from home. I see that in this period that we're living, where we're doing so much online at a distance, I see that your presence is even more and more important. The physical presence is really important, and I'm really happy to see you all here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, sharing with you with what I have received that I think is very beneficial. And I conclude with just a request. If you have heard something that you think is beneficial, try to remember it. Try to write it out, to repeat it, and gradually try to apply it to your life. If not everything, just one point, but don't just leave it here. Like at the beginning, we generated motivation. Traditionally, at the end, we make dedications. We dedicate what we generated. This is inertia. These actions we generate it to the well-being of the beings and the Dharma, so that the Dharma can all. We wish everyone to be in peace. If someone is suffering, they can go beyond their suffering and reach a state of path. We dedicate so that we can always be led.
Dove musal patu ne gyurchi Dewa kuntu yada lamata Dreme chiki pelalo chuchi Sada langi yote rapsone Nje chanki kuparan yortoshu Chusem churim poche Amagye panam ge gyurchi Nepa me payam kone kontu pelware sho nimotele sendele nime kuyan delekshi nitsen tatu delepe koncho sungi jingilo koncho sungi notrupso koncho sungi dashisho. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Thank you, Toshidele. Buon appetito. Today, in the afternoon, around 3:15, we will do a ceremony of the refuge, taking of refuge. If you know what it is, you're welcome to come. If you don't know what it is, and you're just curious, you're welcome to come. You can participate without actually taking refuge. There'll be an explanation. It's a ceremony where one takes the commitment to formally follow this path, and it's done. It's usually after some time that you've been following. Thank you. Buon appetito.